different hats. I try and jump between the different hoops, as it were, at times. I've been lobbying on the life and family issues for about 15 years now, and that can be regional, it can be international, or whatever. Regional would be with European Union, African Union, Council of Europe, and sometimes even the European Court of Human Rights. Internationally, it's more the UN in New York and Geneva, and also the World Health Assembly. I suppose, over the years, many people say to me about the United Nations, surely it's a wonderful organization. And of course it is in some ways, but not in the areas that I'm dealing with. In terms of maybe peacekeeping operations, they can be good, yes. But in the area of it's ECOSOC, I think, it's the Economic and Social Council. In the area of certainly the issues that we deal with here, it is awful, it is terrible. So there's no, we just have to accept that organisations like UNESCO, UNICEF, UNFPA, UNAIDS have very bad agendas, and there's no two ways about that. They're terrible. Of the abortion in terms of schools not notifying parents of problems. That is cutting across the parental rights as the primary educators of their children. We need to reclaim those rights, because that is one of the most important issues. In fact, it's probably the final frontier in all of this. We need to hold on to that and to make sure that parents have the right in all cases for minor children to deal with any issue that comes up. Pope St. John Paul II said, "A new ideology of evil, perhaps more insidious and hidden than its predecessors, which attempts to pit even human rights against the family and against man." Now, Pope John Paul II, or St. John Paul II, as you know, would have experienced the evils of Nazism and communism, and yet he talked about this as a new ideology, more insidious and hidden than its predecessors. Okay, so he was really alerting us to what was happening. Of course, tactics are something that's very important, and we have to notice what tactics our opposition are using. And one of the things that became obvious is that, not only were they failing in their attempts to make abortion a human right, but what did they do when they realized that they hadn't succeeded? The first thing they did was they held a meeting in a place just outside New York, a place called Glen Cove, and they had all their key organisations there, and they decided that, well, if we can't get what we want directly, we'll reinterpret the conventions, and we'll find exactly what we want in that reinterpretation. That actually tells us a lot. It tells us, that many countries, many member states were not buying their agenda. And it also tells us that irrespective of that, they were determined to get what they wanted. And of course, one of the things we come across all the time are the false claims. They claim abortion is a human right. You've heard that many times, I'm sure. Of course, there is no UN convention that agrees with that. They say making abortion, making it legal makes it safe. Prohibition leads to huge numbers of illegal and so-called unsafe abortions. They also claim that non-availability leads to high levels of maternal mortality. And of course, the big point in all that is that they lie. They lie through their teeth all the time. One of the statistics that we have is that annually about 42 million babies are aborted. I heard another statistic recently that says that in the last 50 years, 2 billion babies were aborted. 2 billion. That's probably a quarter of the population of the world. That's what we're dealing with. That's what we have to stop. As I said, no treaty or convention actually mentions abortion, but nevertheless, at one of the counts we had recently, 90 countries on over 120 occasions were told to introduce abortion. Just looking at the milestones, the big push for this agenda started in 1994 with the Cairo conference. I'm sure many of you have heard about the Cairo conference. It continued in 95 with the Beijing conference, and at that time, again, it was Pope St. John Paul II who alerted the countries of the world to, and particularly NGOs, civil society, that this was happening. The US at the time, under the Clinton administration, particularly through Hillary Clinton, who was the ambassador to the UN at the time, were endeavouring to push this agenda and make abortion a human right. As a result of the intervention of Pope John Paul II at the time, that was stopped, and SPUC was deeply involved in that. In fact, John Speeton, our chief executive, was on behalf of the Holy See, was asked to organise all of the NGOs who came together, and they had nightly meetings during that period. Just to then change tack to our strategies. Our strategies are two-pronged. First, we have to identify the culture of death wherever it is and in whatever form it is being presented in the current discussions or negotiations. Second, we have to develop pro-life strategies and initiatives, and I see those as being short-term and long-term. And I think that's absolutely important because, short-term strategies are okay, but they're only dealing with the now. The long-term strategy has to be change. It has to be dramatic change. It has to be complete change. And of course, in all of that, we need to pray for the wisdom of the Holy Spirit. Lobbying is, as I say, primarily educational, but first and foremost, we must be there. I heard the last speakers were talking about making a friend. I say, in this case, attend, and make a friend. I think it's the same thing. One of those, it's important in that case that when we do make those friends, that they trust. That point was also made in the last presentation. We have to ensure that the information we have for delegates is reliable, and reliability in the information we present builds trust. And that trust is very important. We have a number of member states who are with us on critical issues, and we have to make sure that when the new agendas are presented in whatever resolution or report it is, that we present accurate information. Over the years, we've actually seen many different kinds of battles, but currently, and I think this is the most important for everyone to know about, the Cairo program, the Beijing program are both coming to an end. In addition to that, there was also a program called the Millennium Development Goals. They are also coming to an end at the end of this year. And work is underway at present to replace those with a new program. The new program is called the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals will be a program to deal with development over the next 15 years or so. So it's absolutely critical that what is in that program is, has the right agenda from many different organisations to get a radical sexual agenda into that document. The main negotiations for that will take place later this year in June and July. There are currently 2 or 3 different suggestions as to what those goals should be. One of them has 17 goals. It's what's called the Open Working Group. But what we have to make sure is that some of the stuff that is being proposed is taken out. For example, item or goal 3.7 in the Open Working Group says by 2030 ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive healthcare services, including for family planning, information and education, and the integration of reproductive health into national strategies and programs. 5.6 also goes on to say ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights as agreed in accordance with the Programme of Action of ICPD. Another track, the high-level panel, also talks about ensuring universal access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. So everything is included in that phrase, everything that we've talked about today. And I suppose the key question that we have to come to very often and look at ourselves, are we being effective? And we have to truthfully look at that and say, yes, we've had success. We've managed to hold and to halt the anti-life agenda. But so far, we have not succeeded in eliminating it. And as I said earlier, it's not a short-term proposition. It's a generational one. That's why you guys are so important. Because the young people coming on, you're going to replace us, you're going to be doing this work, and it's absolutely crucial that you get involved at international level, or some of you, not all of you will of course, but some of you, and particularly anybody who may be studying law, studying international relations, those kind of programs are conducive to the kind of work that's necessary. Of course then there's the issue of terminology, and one of the things that I say about that is controlling the lexicon is critical. And one of the problems that we have in that case is that before anybody realised what was happening, this agenda was proposed, and the lexicon relating to it was put forward. And it's very hard to change that. But we have some good expressions too. And I think from our side, Pope John Paul II, St. John Paul II, in his phrase, the culture of death, I think that's a wonderful phrase, and it's one that is, if you like, hitting back and getting exactly what's happening into perspective. And that brings us to power. In the UN, we can see that power operates at different levels. You have what I say is the first level of power, which is we're there, the other side is there, we have a level playing field, and usually in that case we can beat the blind because we have the commitment. A lot of those don't. Many of the people who are on the other side are there because either they're paid to be there or whatever. So we can actually win out very, very often if it's a level playing field. But very often it's not a level playing field, and in that case control of the agenda is the critical issue. And one of the problems that we have with that is that the documents that come to us inevitably are from a secretariat to which many of our opponents have been appointed, and therefore the actual documents we start with are not neutral. They're biased in a direction, and so therefore we're fighting uphill, as it were. Even in those cases, we can very often, and most times, get the bad stuff out. We can't necessarily change the thrust of the thing, but we can get the bad stuff out and just hold it, at the level at which it's at. The third level of power that I see is something that we cannot control, because that's outside of our area, or outside of what we do. A classic example of it was, I remember during the Disability Convention a few years ago, when this was a set of negotiations that had gone for about 2 years, and it had come to the last week. And on the Friday before the final week, we had got all the bad stuff out, everything. There was no reference to reproductive health or anything like that. We came back in on the Monday, and Jamaica proposed that reproductive health should go back in, and suddenly it's back in. Now, we appealed to the countries that had stood squarely against it the previous week, but we had no joy. And the question is why? Because what had happened is UNFPA had got on to certain countries over the weekend, spoken to the First Lady of a particular country, and said, look, either this goes in or all aid will stop to your country. Okay? That particular delegate on the following week did not raise the objections because he was instructed not to. So they're the kind of things we cannot control. When it goes outside of our area of influence, as it were. Oops. I'm not sure what happened there, because I don't think it was finished. But perhaps it was, yes. Okay. In general, what I just wanted to say is that, these issues, and come back to it, these issues are critical. It's important that we deal with them at this international level, both in the UN, in the World Health Assembly, also in the European Union, and other areas like the African Union. We need to ensure that we are actually getting to the heart of these negotiations, that we have our people there, that our agenda prevails, not the other agenda. Thank you very much.